The Zondo Commission has now handed over Part 2 of the State Capture Report to the Presidency as promised. The Director General in the Presidency, Phindile Baleni, received the report on behalf of the President from the Secretary of the Commission of Inquiry into State Capture, Professor Itumeleng Mosala. Last month, in a ceremonial handover, the Chairperson of the Commission and the Acting Chief Justice, Raymond Zondo, personally handed over the report to President Ramaphosa. The President has promised to publish all parts of the report shortly after they're presented to the Presidency. Part 2 of the report is based on evidence relating to Transnet and Denel. President Ramaphosa said that he would act on the recommendations of the report only after receiving all three parts. The third and the final part is set to be submitted by the end of this month.
Today we are delivering part 2 of the report. It is envisaged that there will be 3 parts to the report altogether. We had hoped that we would have been able to include 2 more of the volumes inside, but as you can see, these things tend to be big. So part 3 will actually be very, very, very big when it comes.
On behalf of the President, Prof, we are highly appreciative of all the hard work that you've put in to get to this point, and we do realize that you do spend sleepless nights in service of the nation on such a big project that the whole country is interested in. So we really appreciate it. We hope that you feel properly rewarded when it's all done.
Well, for more on the second part of the report, we're now joined by political analyst Khanyi Magubane. Thanks very much indeed for joining us, Khanyi. Welcome.
A very good evening to you, Peter, and your viewers.
All right, so part 1, a lot was talked about. Part 2, has it continued in the same thread of revelations and, I suppose, kind of revealing a lot of what had been going on?
Absolutely, Peter. What we've seen, like the word Revelations, it almost reminds me of the analogy of the Bible, the very last book, Revelations, and that's what it feels like when you start to read volume 2, part 2 with volume 1 and volume 2. It is a lengthy, detailed report. And I think what we are seeing is the continuation of this picture that's being built by the Zondo Commission, looking at the different SOEs. They've looked at SAA, now they're looking at Denel and Transnet. And what the Commission is doing is painting a picture of a very systematic degrading of governance structures and the swiftning of finances from these different SOEs by the appointment of specific individuals who enabled state capture, according to the Zondo Commission. And we've seen the names of Siyabonga Kama, Brian Mulife, Anoj Singh, also who was the former CFO of Transnet, being fingered by the Commission and being recommended to be prosecuted for their role in breaking down, structures or in enabling corruption to take place, for instance, in places like Transnet. So, Peter, what we are seeing here is the Zondo Commission saying that it is an investigative body. When I read volume 1, it says that its role is to investigate and then make further recommendations to security agencies and investigative agencies like the Hawks to further investigate and prosecute certain individuals.
What has, I'm sure you haven't read the whole thing, but what has struck you so far from your initial review of part 2?
I think what struck me, Peter, is how organized this network was. Okay, we see a picture emerging of executives and boards being captured. We see a picture of executives being made to sign off certain contracts and tenders, under duress. We're seeing a very systematic way of working where there was influence from the Gupta family and their associates, where we see the former President Jacob Zuma himself also being implicated in the report, saying that he, along with the Gupta family and their associates, were very actively involved in which executives were appointed, with the specific view of influencing the way in which, tenders and contracts will go. We know that Regiment's Capital has also been implicated in the report, and their role was to oversee a number of transactions within some of these SOEs, and they took fees of up to 50% of the value, of those transactions. And so it's just how organized it was, and the depth and the level at which it happened. It touched almost every part of government, and that for me has really been what stood out so far.
When we start looking at part one and part two, it does seem that this could not have happened without influence from maybe even the highest office in the land.
Well, Peter, putting it in that way, of course, we know that any president of any sitting country is the first citizen of that country, and by extension, perhaps the most powerful. He's the most powerful and influential, and part and parcel of the terms of reference of the Zondo Commission was to investigate if there was abuse of power from the president's office, if there was abuse of power by those who were put in place to be the guardians of the national purse, corruption by those who were put in specific positions to carry out the work of government if there was an abuse of power. Now, one of the recommendations, and in fact, before I get to those recommendations, one of the biggest criticisms of the Zondo Commission was that its findings were merely circumstantial and that there was no real tangible proof that could prove beyond a shadow of the doubt any of the assertions that were being made in the report. And in response to that, one of the recommendations of the Zondo Commission is that the abuse of power, that the laws be changed so that the abuse of power becomes a criminal offense which could carry up to 20 years in prison.
Yeah, when you read some of the language in this report, it is quite frightening. I mean, there's one point here it says, in many of the instances of wrongdoing in procurement at Transnet between 2011 and 2018 possibly amounted to planned offences as part of a pattern of racketeering activity conducted by a racketeering enterprise. I mean, this is mafioso activity, really.
Well, I mean, Peter, there's no doubt that the Gupta family and their associates were out to I'm trying to find a very TV-friendly word, but they were out to finish the public purse. They were out to get as much as they could, whether you're talking about SOEs, whether you're talking about department tenders, whether you're talking about energy or, the freight and the rail sector, whether you're talking about airlines. They were really intent on getting their fingers in every pie. And the reports that are coming out now are actually drawing the picture of how this actually happened. And they relied on the testimonies of hundreds of people who were subpoenaed to come forward to the Zondo Commission to testify, some of whom were at some point even intimidated, from testifying. In some cases, we saw some individuals trying to institute, legal, I would say interdicts to prevent them from going, but they did. So I think that, Peter, as we continue to receive report number 3, we're going to see an almost complete picture of just how deep state capture was. And the president is very, very invested in the recommendations of the Zondo Commission being carried out. And I think it's in his own interest as well that he sees prosecutions taking place.
Talking about names, you mentioned them, some of them already. 3 persons were identified as the primary architects and implementers of state capture at Transnet: Mr. Brian Malife, Mr. Anoj Singh, and Mr. Siyabonga Gama. Is it then a coincidence that Mr. Malife and Mr. Singh end up at the next SOE, ESCOM?
Well, Peter, like I said earlier on, it's a network. It's a network of individuals who are almost puppet masters, if I can use that analogy, and they actually move, or maybe we can even look at it as a type of a chess game where they move from one SOE to another, because when an executive has been kicked out of a particular company for gross mismanagement, for gross corruption, under normal circumstances, you wouldn't want to see them at another SOE in a senior executive position, but that's what happened. People were simply moved from one place to another because they were protected, because they were part of a network, because they could do so, So there's also that sense of impunity, a disregard for power and, and almost absolute power corrupting, absolutely a disregard for governance and rules and the procurement processes and supply chain management, a complete disregard of that.
I suppose when Mr. Godin used to talk about connecting the dots, there were things that were happening separately, but we probably didn't have an idea that actually all of these activities were connected and related. The movement of SAA from public enterprises to Treasury, for example, that certain ministers were moved from one ministry to another just before certain transactions. It seems that there was an operations room looking at the entire government and saying, how do we manage it?
Absolutely. There had to be strategists behind it. There had to be people who are actively strategizing in terms of how and where to move certain individuals, and the people who are doing the actual deal structuring behind the scenes and putting and aligning certain deals with certain ministers. We've seen Minister Lynn Brown also being implicated. We've seen people like Malusi Gigaba also being implicated as the former Minister of Public Enterprises. And apparently he's also gone on social media to say that the acting Chief Justice is trying to destroy him by dragging him into this report and actually recommending that he be one of the people that be investigated further. But definitely, Peter, if there's one thing that is definitely emerging as these reports come out, is how organized, how structured, and how much was involved, how much detail was involved in planning and executing a state-owned enterprise, government department, agencies. No one was safe in that time.
Again, another part talks about more than R1 billion that was laundered through shell companies. It's staggering that it's just R1 billion, one organization. And we don't know maybe the full extent of this state capture because only certain entities were investigated. It could be there's much, much more to this.
Absolutely. There's no doubt that had the acting Chief Justice and the Zondo Commission as a whole had more time, that they would have continued unpacking more of the state capture networks and how it actually worked, which is why the Zondo Commission has said that they've done their work up to this point and their terms of references have been fulfilled as far as what they were asked to investigate. They've done that. Moving forward, now they're going to rely on, the government arms, such as the Hawk, such as the public protectors, such as all of these different agencies that are there as well in terms of the security cluster and the law enforcement agencies, to take it forward to further investigate. And so as these further investigations happen, Peter, we'll definitely see more coming out, because I don't think that this is the last time we're going to see people being called to testify, because they will be engaging with other law enforcement agencies to continue doing the same. So I don't think that even with the end of the Zondo Commission report being submitted, part 3, I don't think that the investigations will quite end at that point.
It's an important year for the African National Congress as they lead up to their elective conference. You're a political analyst. Are there political consequences to the release of this report and these reports generally?
Absolutely. And, not only just in the elective conference coming up, but also looking at 2024 when South Africans go to the polls. The Zondo Commission is widely and publicly available for all South Africans to read and actually understand for themselves. And I think that what this is going to mean is that the ANC, for instance, that's also been implicated in terms of being a beneficiary of some of the millions of these funds to run political campaigns. They are going to go into, the elective campaign. I wouldn't say limping. I think limping would be a bit extreme, but a weakened party, especially if the local government election results are anything to go by. And I think the Zondo Commission further weakens the relationship between the ANC and ordinary South Africans, because, of course, we know that once a perception has been created and formed, it sticks. And the perception that is being formed for South Africans right now is that, the ANC went into government, they went into power, and they looted government and almost left nothing behind. Whether and you can look at the different administrations, but certainly at this point in time, the former President Jacob Zuma's administration is the one that's being indicted as having done the most damage to the country, according to these reports.
Khanyi, always good talking to you. Thank you so much. Your insights are greatly appreciated. Thank you for your time.
Thank you very much to you, Peter.
All right, that's political analyst Khanyi Magubane speaking to us about the second part of the State Capture Commission's report on the state capture that has taken place in South Africa. Well, you can